of congregational preaching, helping so many people, women and men, on the path of bhakti. She's had a lifelong interest in issues concerning women and children, and she also is a graduate of Harvard Law School and practices law in the U.S., with her emphasis specifically on helping victims of domestic abuse. She is also a trained peer counselor for domestic abuse issues and previously taught at Chapman University School of Law and the University of San Diego School of Law, and is currently in San Diego. So that's all for me. Now you get to hear from her, which is super exciting. Thank you so much. I'll pass it off to you, Radha Dasi.
Hare Krishna. Thank you all so much for allowing me to be here. I am grateful to have your association. And Rukmini asked me to start with a special prayer or intention for ladies this year. And I think what I hope the most for all of us is that we learn to accept and value ourselves and each other. So many times we are the ones who are giving and giving, to our families, to the people we work with. We are biologically hardwired to be the ones who form connections and create societies. But if we're not careful, by this I mean me, we give, but we don't make sure that we're also getting, And so I hope that we can connect with each other in a way that allows us to love and support each other. So that's my hope and prayer. And Rukmini Prabhu, what next? You're muted, Rukmini Prabhu.
Okay, sorry. That's a beautiful intention for.
You're muted again. I can't hear you.
There. Okay, now? Did you hear?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. That was a beautiful intention for all of us for ending up this very difficult year and moving forward into the next year. So thank you for that. But I want to backtrack a little bit because I find you, you're a very, very dear friend of mine, a lifelong friend. And I find you to be such an interesting, fascinating person. Your life and your outlooks, your perspectives, and I just don't want to dismiss too quickly your history because I think you have really, really some fascinating roots to tell us about. You're from a biracial family, and could you just kind of tell us a little bit about your roots because it's really it is so interesting for all of us.
Well, my parents, they were married for 25 years, and I'm not sure how they made it past the first 6 months. They were from such different worlds. My father's family is from China. My grandfather was a very wealthy industrialist prior to the Communist Revolution, and they left China as refugees and came to the US with very little. My mother was Black. She was born in Alabama. Jim Crow was very much alive and well when she was a small child. And my grandmother moved to California in the 50s, late 40s or early 50s, mostly to get away from that environment. So I grew up with three cultural influences. The one is mainstream American culture. The other is a traditional Chinese culture, and then, Black American culture and different sets of friends and relations in each of those arenas. I struggled because I never felt like I fit in anywhere, right? I told Rukmini the other day, I was too reserved and quiet for my Black relatives, but I was too loud and exuberant for the Chinese relatives, and that's sort of a theme that has stayed with me. I often find myself in situations where I'm, maybe too liberal for the conservatives or too conservative for the liberals, or just, in this middle ground. But it did make me aware early on that we all have so much more in common than the differences between us. And so when I came into contact with Krishna consciousness, and Prabhupada said, you're not this body, that skin color is irrelevant, it just entered my heart like this deep truth that I had lived. And to hear it articulated that way was so affirming.
Wow, that's so interesting. So was it an immediate resonance for you? Was I mean, that coming to Krishna consciousness, that's a pretty deep realization. You know,
Yeah.
yeah. Was there baggage around it, or was
Oh
it?
yeah. Yeah. I my path to Krishna consciousness, I think I came in through the back door. My parents, like I said, did not have a lot in common, and our family was extremely dysfunctional. Both of my parents are alcoholics, and pretty much what you would expect out of two totally different personalities who were drunk all the time. That was my childhood. So I was not a particularly mentally or emotionally healthy person, and I managed life by taking drugs. That was my coping mechanism. And it was through someone I met in that arena that I came into contact with Krishna consciousness. And let me tell you, there are plenty of drug addicts out there who are preaching. Lord Chaitanya, Lord Nityananda, they will go anywhere to give us this mercy. So I read the introduction to the Bhagavad Gita, and I had this deep realization that every question about the world that I had been answered, right? And I immediately identified that this is my path, okay? But I didn't know, like, what is this path? Who are these people? Who is Srila Prabhupada? All I know is he has all the answers. So finding out that it was the Hare Krishnas and that they had these 4 regulative principles, one of which was no intoxication, was kind of hard. It took me a few years, 3 or 4 years to really take up the path wholeheartedly. But Krishna is very kind. So, he just put the squeeze on that everything that used to work, every way I used to hold my life together, it just became more and more unmanageable very quickly, so that I had no choice, but to give up the things that were holding me back.
Wow. So were you getting kind of a skewed impression of Krishna consciousness from drug addict preachers?
Only from the man who was my husband at the time. He really leaned heavily into that, the wife should always be submissive, and whatever you need me to, I need you to do, that's what you should do. But what I learned from that experience was how important it is to read Srila Prabhupada's books for ourselves. And I think a lot of us, and I get in this habit myself also, we get that knowledge through the devotees. We listen to lectures, we discuss with others, but we really need, especially as ladies, we need to make sure that we have our own connection directly to Prabhupada's words. And that also helped me to realize later on that each of us is going to have, unique realizations from reading Prabhupada's books, from directly connecting with Srila Prabhupada. And it's such a shame if we don't take advantage of that. I have heard some of the most profound realizations from very young women who are very new to Krishna consciousness, but somehow, their inspiration, hits my ears in such a way that it goes right to my heart. And so we, a lot of times we think, well, if I'm not a senior devotee, if I'm not pure, if I'm not, 100% committed to Krishna and nothing else, I shouldn't say anything. So I'm not sure how I got on this point. Share your realizations, read Prabhupada's books. It's I think something that ladies maybe don't always do, but we should.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And Prabhupada's interactions with his women disciples are also so sacred. The book Bhagavat, but then also the person Bhagavat.
Yeah.
Both are so important and so sacred. And understanding, you were saying something to me the other day about understanding him in context. Do you want to unpack that a little bit more? That was really beautiful.
Yeah. I think it, living a Krishna conscious life means paying attention all the time to everything we're doing. We were just talking about, before we started talking about the COVID situation we find ourselves in, and how we may, come up with an answer to what our behavior should be like, and then circumstances change and we have to rethink the whole thing. And most of us want to avoid doing this kind of intellectual work, right? So we look for a slogan or a line or a political party or just some easy way that we can answer all of the questions in our lives without thinking. And what devotees do is we pick a Prabhupada said. Prabhupada said women should be submissive. Prabhupada said everyone is entitled to the mercy. And you can pick out, any position you want to take. You can probably find a Prabhupada said that will back you up, right? But that's not really what Prabhupada said. He may have said all of these things, but he didn't say only this one thing I said is important. Everything he said, everything he did is important. And if we want to understand Prabhupada, we have to understand him in the context of all of his instructions, the way he applied his instructions, the person Bhagavat, how he dealt with the devotees. And only in that way are we really going to be able to represent Srila Prabhupada through our service, through our activities, because Prabhupada said some things, that women should be, submissive. But he also said men should be submissive, right? So my husband and I joke around, when we're fighting, he's not allowed to use the S word, the submissive, because it shuts down communication if he tells me I should be submissive. But all devotees are supposed to be submissive, right? To be submissive to the spiritual master, to be submissive to the community authorities. It's not just an instruction for women. And to demand submission from women without putting it in the context of how does everyone in the society relate to each other, it misrepresents Prabhupada, and it can, and in the past has, led to really dysfunctional consequences.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, and also the idea of protection,
Right.
Brahmins are supposed to be protected. Elderly
Yeah.
people are supposed to be protected. Children are supposed to be protected. Sacred people are supposed to be protected. So that's kind of an interesting twist. But I'm feeling like you kind of jumped ahead here, and I want to just
Okay.
jump back. So did Krishna consciousness come before or after Harvard Law School? And can you unpack that a little bit? And yeah, okay, one question at a time. When did that happen, and when did the whole Krishna parts come into your life? Or tell us
Yeah.
anecdotes from the law school chapter of your fascinating life and how that was an impetus to your where you are now.
Okay. Yeah, I guess having grown up with, certain kinds of family abuse, I always resonated with the underdog and, with victims of abuse, and had this need to save the world, right? So going to law school for me was this attempt to figure out, how can I make this world better? And one of the most discouraging experiences I had was working with the Harvard Legal Aid Bureau and realizing that you can solve a problem for somebody, but poverty is so systemic that all you can do is put your finger in the dike, as an attorney anyway. All you can do is put your finger in the dike, right? But that flood is still coming because there are so many other limitations, issues, challenges that come with poverty. and this vision I had of myself as, the savior of the downtrodden, it just wasn't going to happen because the law didn't, the law couldn't make society better. The law couldn't make the world a fairer, kinder place, which is what is really needed. So I was in law school actually when I was given this Bhagavad Gita. And that's part of what really resonated for me, is that we can't make society better without changing the consciousness of people. I think many people who aren't particularly God conscious even can see that, right? But how do you make people, how do you change their consciousness? How do I change my consciousness? And Prabhupada said, this is the way. If you do these things, your consciousness will change. And if you share these things with others, their consciousness will change. And suddenly I could see this path forward to, the goal that I had of wanting the world to be a better place. And then, as I said, I struggled with not wanting to commit to the lifestyle. Prabhupada said, if you do these things, you can change your consciousness. And I kept trying to negotiate with him. What if I do half of it or 3/4 of it? Will that work? But
you're in Boston. You're in Boston.
I was in Cambridge. I had gone to California for a spring break, and someone had given me this Gita. So part of the time I was in California, part of the time I was in Boston.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so then how long were you married to this husband who was the drug addict? You want to unpack your life a little bit for us?
Yeah. We were married for, I'm trying to remember. I think we were married for 6 years, but we only lived together for 4. And I had like really wonderful dramatic adventures, because he ended up, after we had separated, he ended up becoming a bank robber in order to support his drug habit.
That's very cool. Wow.
So, he got arrested. I got interviewed by the FBI.
Wow.
I took our son to visit him, so it was.
You took your son to visit him in prison?
Yeah.
What was that like? I have to say, I've been reading Brian Stevenson, Just
Mhm.
Mercy, and he's also a Harvard educated attorney. And he says something so beautiful that none of us are defined by the worst thing that we've ever done, which I find really, really beautiful. He's trying to bring restorative justice into America, which is no small task. So you brought your son to visit his father in prison.
Yeah.
How did that go?
It was very stressful. Nobody wants to be in a prison. The people who work there don't want to be there. The people who are incarcerated there don't want to be there. It's, the ethereal vibration, is just tension and stress 100%. And it's such a hard thing raising children and knowing what the right thing to do is, right? Should I be bringing my son into this environment? How important is his connection to his father? And of course, you don't have foresight either. What is going to happen to this relationship between father and son, after the father is released from prison, and what is he going to do with his life, and where is he going to go? Much of my life has been the experience of Krishna showing me how little I know and how little I can really figure out on my own. But I think raising children is the place where those lessons were the most profound.
Wow. Can you tell the story of well, I just want to say one thing, actually. I hope you all don't mind that I'm quoting. But I was just reminded of Richard Rohr, who's another great teacher that we admire. He's a Catholic, a Franciscan, and he was working in prisons in New Mexico. And he said that there are many men in America who first meet their fathers in jail. So it's a very, very sad situation. Can you tell us a little bit about your kids? So you have a really adorable story about your daughter. I don't know if you want to share anything about your son, But I know you have an adorable story about your daughter, whatever you'd like to share.
Yeah, I have great kids, but they are their own individuals. I before I had children, I thought it was kind of like a, science fair project where, you figure out how you want them to turn out, and then you do the things that cause them to turn out that way, and then you get a blue ribbon for being such a great mother. And obviously, if anybody has paid any attention, even if you don't have children, even if you're just paying attention to people who have children, that's not true. My son, from practically infancy, wanted to play with guns and knives, and people used to joke that at the temple he'd come in and they'd ask him, okay, what did you bring today? Is it a plastic shotgun, a plastic sword? Or there would always be something. So he grew up, and of course he wanted to join the military, and that's what he did. So he was in Afghanistan. He was a combat corpsman, which is the Navy version, the Marine version of the medic. And he came away with some really serious post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's tough watching your children make decisions that have harsh consequences for them. As a mother, you never want your children to suffer in any way at all, ever, right? But trying to understand that even though this undesirable consequence happened, it still was, the right path for him. And trusting Krishna that just as I went through, really horrible self-inflicted, things, and I didn't have the good motive of wanting to help people who were injured, and Krishna used those to propel me forward. Krishna can also do that for my children. So my daughter, I love this story. I'll tell it. Because for me, it kind of crystallizes a very important realization I had. I joined ISKCON in the late 80s. And at that time, the women stood in the back of the temples in North America, the men gave the classes, led the kirtans, and I didn't know it had ever been different. I was told that this is Srila Prabhupada's teaching, and it's a great opportunity to develop humility, and if you want to become Krishna conscious, you accept this. And I wasn't 100% convinced, but I was kind of willing to give it a try. For one thing, having the Chinese part of the family, the idea of women being subservient, at least externally, was not, unfamiliar. So I kind of went along with it. And then when my daughter was about, I think she was around 2, we were in the temple and there was kirtan going on, and we were standing with the ladies in the back. And she wanted to go up in front of Krishna and stand right in front of Krishna, because that's where she liked to stand during the kirtan. So she wanted to go. I said, okay, go. And she grabbed my hand because she wanted me to go with her. And my daughter has a strong will. She's very firm when she knows that she wants something. So she was starting to kind of have a meltdown, and I was trying to, fix the situation very quickly and without a lot of noise. So I just told her, look, if I stand there, the brahmacharis will get mad at me. So I have to stay back here. And she just walked over to the nearest brahmachari and punched him. And, she's a tiny little thing. So I don't know that, he even registered that she had punched him, but she did. And I looked at that and I thought, this way of approaching Krishna consciousness, standing in the back and being humble, and, it's not, she's going to have a problem with this. This is not going to work for her, so what do I want to do with that? And that really got me started thinking about how can we create space for young women, for women who either are growing up in Krishna consciousness or coming to it. How can we help them to feel at home, and at least in our culture in North America, when you come to a place, you open the door and you see all the women in the back, it doesn't feel inviting. It really doesn't. And, and she just really made that clear to me.
Great story. So you've done a lot of work with abused women with your work as an attorney, but it sounds like also you've opened doors for women in abusive situations within ISKCON also. So can you tell us more about maybe some anecdotes or how have you opened the doors to help women have their own identity and their own standing, not at the back of the room, back of the bus?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. One is just to validate somebody's experience. And this is something we can all do. I don't know how many times I have talked to a woman who has been, abused by her partner or experienced sexual harassment at the temple or, whatever, and been told that, this is not really a problem, right? It's your karma. You just don't understand, this particular devotee, or, he's a saintly person and you're misinterpreting everything he's doing. So not only are you experiencing abuse, but then you're being told that your reality is not real, so that's even, I think in some ways even worse. So just to validate that, yes, what you're describing is sexual harassment. No, Srila Prabhupada does not want you to accept a husband that gives you a black eye. These are very important things that we can all do. And then to create space for women to be able to practice Krishna consciousness, to express their talents, their interests, whether, that's at the temple or not. And part of, I think, the most important service I've done is help my husband develop home programs. And the first speaking opportunity I got as a woman in ISKCON was at a home program. The temple wasn't an option back then, right? So leading kirtan, speaking, organizing projects, many times these are things that we don't necessarily get invited to do at the temple, and even for a lot of men, it's just the temple can only accommodate so many people trying to, do certain things. And so to create those opportunities in the community and to empower devotees, to help devotees understand you can do anything you want in Krishna consciousness. If you have an idea for a project, if you have a burning desire to do something, you can do it. Sometimes we're waiting for permission. I think as women, this is so true. We're waiting for someone to give us permission to do something that we are fully capable of doing. Sometimes it's something we're already doing, but we're not owning it because no one has given us permission to do it. So,
Do you feel like you've been able to impact the culture, change the culture? Do you have any anecdotes about that over the years?
I don't know. Well, okay, here's an example. And this isn't, deep or profound, and it's not just for ladies, but this is the kind of thing that I mean. When I was a young devotee in San Diego on Prabhupada's appearance day, we would read a number of the offerings from the Prabhupada Vyasa Puja book written by, senior devotees in the movement. And then if there was time left over, any Prabhupada disciples who were present could share, some offering to Srila Prabhupada. And one of the things that we did was change that program, because it's nice to read the offerings in the book, but that's something that everybody can do on their own time, right? So we invited first the Prabhupada disciples, but then everybody else to share some realization, some offering, some way that they had experienced Srila Prabhupada's mercy. And this happens every time, new people are invited to speak. You hear these wonderful, deep realizations that you would have missed if you hadn't opened up, the space for more voices to be heard. And I think that's probably what I would want most for ISKCON, in the coming years, is opening up that space, for Vaishnavis, women in particular, but also, for anyone else whose voice is being excluded.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Well, I find that really culture changing and really hopeful for the future. And I think you're so right that to not wait for permission, to just do what you feel inspired to do, and
Yeah.
each of us has such unique abilities. I mean, I think each one of us is born an individual, but the society, maybe ISKCON in particular, is very good at trying to put us in a mold of someone that we're not, and kind of, you know, we tend to get those individual and unique gifts pushed down and ignored, but those voices will keep coming up for us. So that's really culture changing. I find that really interesting. Tell us more about your work with the Vaishnavi ministry, or the path of bhakti is called Vaishnavism. And so a woman who practices the path of bhakti is called a Vaishnavi. So you're in charge of the International Vaishnavi Ministry. So can you tell us more about that work, helping to uplift women's voices?
Yeah, and this position, springs from the work that many other women have done in the past, including you, Rukmini Prabhu,
Thank you.
advocating for, the need for a woman's representative at our highest level of management, of authority, as well as, all throughout the society. So the Vaishnavi ministry, the women's ministry, was created in response to a number of female disciples of Srila Prabhupada speaking to our governing body commission, the highest level of management, and letting them know that things were not okay for the women in our organization, that they were being silenced and excluded. And this was not the way that Srila Prabhupada had treated women, and it was not healthy for the society. So that's, I think, at the core of what the women's minister is meant to be doing, is attending the management meetings, attending the GBC meetings, and speaking up on behalf of women.
Governing body commission.
Yeah, the governing body commission. Yeah.
International.
And then the other part of my service is to develop, regional networks of women who are working to support and empower Vaishnavis. And that has been such an inspiration. I don't know how to say. Every time I try to open up a new area, I find that there are already women there doing this work, advocating for victims of domestic abuse within our organization, creating programs and opportunities for other women, helping to advocate in their region for policies that will empower women at the local level. They're already doing it. I'm doing.
So you have Vaishnavi ministers from which areas of the world? Tell us about that.
Okay, so Russia, South America, specifically in Brazil and Mexico, but also like a regional ministry for Latin America as well. North America, the UK, Australia, and South Africa. And as I said, these women are doing amazing things. There is no shortage, absolutely no shortage of really empowered, intelligent, professional, spiritual, wonderful women. And it so amazes me that we are letting this resource, this, Krishna's devotees who could be offering so much more, that we are letting them be underutilized.
And there are official policies in ISKCON against domestic abuse and spousal abuse and all that, right?
Sure. Yeah, there are policies against domestic abuse. There are policies requiring, equal opportunity to participate. And so part of what, the work that we need to do is making managers and leaders aware of those policies and encouraging them to follow those policies.
And where do you think this stuff comes from? Is it sort of is it like a culture gap when Indian cultural values come through the the filter of a brain of a Russian or American man, or where does this stuff come from? I mean, my father didn't act like that. I don't know. I mean, where does this
Yeah.
stuff come from?
Well, I think a lot of it is not coming from anywhere. It was there,
It was where? It was where?
In the secular culture
In
to
this.
start with.
So not just
You know,
India. You're saying it's not just India.
no. I mean, the domestic abuse laws in Russia, a couple of years ago, they passed a law that said, domestic abuse is not a crime if you don't inflict a serious injury. This is a first world country, right? And similarly in a lot of Latin American countries, Asian countries, African countries, they don't take domestic abuse particularly seriously. Even in America, which, we like to think that we are on the forefront of this, and we are. But I know from working in the field myself that a lot of times the police, the district attorney, they don't take it seriously. I had one client who was beaten so badly that the occipital bone around her eye was fractured and it got infected, and she had to have surgery, and she was in the hospital. And months later, I'm still calling the district attorney, and they're saying they haven't made a decision on whether to press charges against this man. Now, had he been a stranger and done that to her, there would be no question but that charges would be brought. Somehow the fact that she was in a relationship with this man made this very horrific injury somehow less important and less serious.
Is that because she did not want to prosecute?
No, that was not the reason at all. I don't know what the reason was. And eventually they did, they did file the charges and arrest him. But I kind of wonder if I hadn't been calling every week, if they would have done that.
Can you tell us about that cycle of abuse kind of syndrome? Like, I've heard this term, the honeymoon period, where, there's an abusive situation, but then the woman, I mean, sometimes a woman is also an abuser, but most often it's a man. But sometimes a woman thinks, oh, he's really such a nice person and he means well. He doesn't mean to act like that. And it's really, and then can you kind of unpack that kind of scenario?
Sure. Yeah. And, I'm just going to speak from my experience, and not everyone who works with domestic abuse issues would necessarily agree with this. But, as a lawyer in court, I see a certain number of cases where it's just obvious somebody blew it. Sometimes it's the woman, sometimes it's the man, usually it's the man. But, this is a one-off event. It's probably never going to happen again. Doesn't make it okay. But I just want to make the point that you do have those situations, okay? Which makes it more complicated when you get to the other situations, which really involve a pattern of power and control. Because this serious domestic abuse, the ongoing domestic abuse, that's what it's about. It's about power and control. It's not about anger. People oftentimes think that it's an anger issue, right? And one of the ways you can tell is, does this person have the same behavior when he gets angry at work or with his male friends, or, right? When you have somebody whose only violence is directed at their partner, that's not an anger issue. It's something much more insidious. And the what they call the cycle of violence is a pattern that couples get into, that allows the abuser to kind of string the victim along. And that is, there will be a very heavy courtship period. This is the kind of person who, they call it love bombing, right? They just shower you with affection and gifts and attention. And then there's kind of what they call a tension building phase, where the person's need to exert control gets bigger and bigger, because this is how they manage whatever their story is. And then there's the violent explosion, where the person acts out. And there's always a story about why they acted out. I wouldn't have done this if you hadn't, right? Burned the dinner, gone shopping with your mother, brushed your teeth, and again, it's not real. That's not really why they're blowing up. That's not why they're acting out violently, but that's the story. And so the victim always has this hope, because this person loves me so much. They've shown it by all this love bombing behavior. They love me so much. And the only reason they did this was because I did something. And if I can fix my behavior, if I can adjust myself, we can get rid of this problem. And it's a very seductive, very powerful, kind of hook that keeps women coming back, thinking that this is something they have control over. And part of, recovery from this is getting the understanding that you as the victim have no control over this.
So what's your advice? I mean, I have to ask, if, there may be someone listening to this conversation thinking, that sounds like a situation that I'm in, or I am occasionally in. So what is your advice to ladies who are listening to this conversation?
I would, in North America, I would say reach out to the professional, people in your community that work on this. You can Google domestic violence programs. You can call the National Domestic Violence Hotline. The truth is that women are actually in danger. This isn't, I'm talking very glibly about this, but this violence can be life-threatening. It can cause permanent injuries. And so when a woman is in this, she does need to think about how to safely change her situation. Most domestic violence murders occur because the perpetrator feels that he is losing or has lost control over his partner. The worst violence happens when women are leaving or have left. So it is really important to get professional help. And it's also important to realize too, that aside from this, false hope, there are a lot of other reasons that women stay in these relationships. One of the biggest is financial, right? It's very hard to leave if you know that you and your children will be homeless. If you do, so it takes time and support to work out for a woman. It's not as simple as saying, okay, I'm going to leave and getting up and going.
Do you find that sometimes women are there's a shame factor, that they don't want to tell anyone in the devotee community, or maybe they don't want to reach out to someone who's not a devotee? Or can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, all of that. We as devotees, we're in each other's business all the time, right? And that can be hard if you have a difficult family situation. You don't necessarily want, everybody in the community knowing about it. And also, you're gonna get some kind of backlash from your partner if you disclose and he finds out about it, right? So not only is there the shame factor, but there's, just a very concrete safety factor as well. So that's one part. And then the other part is sometimes, and I've had this experience, we run into advocates or counselors who are not sensitive to our culture. That's something that in training domestic violence counselors, they focus on, is the need to be sensitive to a culture. Our scriptures, our model of male-female relationships is not 100% compatible with your average American's understanding of how a man and a woman should behave in a relationship. We may have people either, by training as devotees, or, because they come from another country, who are comfortable with the idea that the man is the head of the household. Getting help in a domestic violence situation should not require that they change their worldview. So sometimes we have to ask for help from more than one person. But I think one of the most important things we need to understand as a community is, don't come in and expect the victim to immediately change her situation. Like, don't have criteria for her to meet in order for you to support her. A lot of times people try to help. She goes back to the abuser. Everybody's like, oh, well, we tried to help her. But to understand that, what are the reasons why she went back and how can we help her, even although she's gone back? Because there are ways you can help, even if the, couple is still living together. There's still ways to help. I read a statistic recently that said it takes 7 tries for the average victim of domestic violence to finally leave the relationship. So we need to look at it as a process.
What about the importance of women friends? I mean, sometimes he's her only friend.
Yeah.
Or she doesn't really have anyone she feels like she can trust.
Yeah. And usually if he's her only friend, it's because he has insisted on that. Right. A number of times I have observed signs of domestic violence in a woman. You see bruises or whatever. And many of the mothers in the community will know, even without being told, that this is going on. And you reach out to that woman and she doesn't reciprocate, right? It could very well be, and I've had this experience, that it's because the husband does not allow her to. I remember one woman I called, 3 or 4 times and left a message because nobody ever answered. And finally, the husband answered one day and said, stop calling. I'm not going to let her be friends with you, right? So, that's going on. So the point I'm making is we can signal to them, I'm here if you need me. I'm here when you're ready to talk. And not taking it personally that they don't respond in a way that we might expect.
And what if I'm going into a relationship? What if I'm, as we say in this kind, associating with someone, and young couples tend to think, oh, it's us against the world. No one understands us, and are there danger signs that we should look for in those early behaviors if we are seeing someone with a potential relationship idea down the road? What would
Yeah,
you say?
absolutely. One of the biggest ones is past relationships. If you're getting involved with someone who has 5 ex-girlfriends and all of them are crazy, that's a big red flag. Okay, because the likelihood is it's not them, it's him. He's the common factor. But even if it is true that they are all crazy, he's still the one who picked them, right? The love bombing thing, the instant intimacy. I'm going to give up all my friends for you, and you're going to give up all your friends for me, and it's just going to be the 2 of us, and life is going to be perfect. And we should get married yesterday. That's a red flag. Look at how the person deals with you expressing an opinion that's different from theirs. How does this person deal with conflict? Are you guys able to talk it through and resolve it? I think and I know I was like this as a young person, rushing in too fast. There's a reason for long engagements and, taking our time to get to know somebody, even beyond the issue of domestic violence,
Right.
And doing service with somebody.
Hmm.
That used to be kind of a thing, is when people were associating, they would be given a devotional project to do together, right? And that's a really good way to see how we work together. And
But then what do you think about also seeing that person outside of the devotee context? Because sometimes they're, on best behavior around the temple, but then, you go visit your mom with him, or his mom, and you see a whole different set of behaviors. So
yeah,
seeing him in a different context, and
yeah,
I really like what you said about, you know, uh, being able to disagree, or how do people disagree, and how do they voice their disparate opinions? You
yeah,
know, I appreciate that you have that opinion, but I don't share that. And can that different opinion be respected? I mean, not only with a guy, but with a god sister as well.
yeah,
When we choose our friends, and choose the people we want to be intimate with.
yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful.
And it goes back to really trusting our own worth and our own thoughts and feelings, especially for young women. I think that's hard. That, a lot of times when someone doesn't agree with us, we just automatically assume that we must be the one who's incorrect, right?
Sometimes,
But
sometimes I wonder if, the kind of hierarchical thinking that we have, that we have senior devotees and we have, sort of a hierarchy, we'll hear from the gurus and we'll hear from the seniors. Is that demeaning to younger people and younger people being able to express their views and their voices? I mean, do we need some new kind of forums for more of a, horizontal exchange, or what do you think about that?
I think it's because we don't fully understand how that hierarchy is supposed to work. We do have this top-down model, right? And part of the problem is we're taking something that was prevalent in a community and in family units, right? And we're putting it into an institution, okay? So in a family, mom and dad may be in charge, okay? But they don't make decisions without getting input from the rest of the family. It happens organically. I may tell my children to do something I know they don't want to do, and I may, as the mother, have decided that they need to do it anyway, but I'm fully aware of what they're thinking and feeling. You can't avoid it. Okay. But then you get into an institution and now you're talking about, a regional manager or a temple manager, and they're making decisions and giving instructions, and they're probably not hearing back from the people whose lives are affected. Right.
Because,
So in that,
go ahead, please.
I was just going to say that, in that sense, yes, the hierarchy becomes a little dysfunctional. We do need, to hear from each other more, and our leaders need to hear from us more. If nothing else, I have learned from having, dialogue with devotees instead of lecturing. A lot of times you think that somebody has understood something you've said, right? And they think they've understood it. And then when they repeat it back to you, you realize, no, they didn't get it at all. And if we don't hear from others, we're never, if no one hears from us, no one's ever going to be able to help us overcome our misconceptions.
So a dialogue instead of a monologue is what you're saying.
Yeah.
And then
we really need that.
Yeah. And it also seems to me that, we have a spiritual idea of how can I serve you? Let me be the servant of the servant of the servant. But the way that plays out in human dealings, I think needs a lot of work,
Right.
like the idea of servant leadership.
Yeah. I know my spiritual teacher, when we're working on a service project, he will say to the disciples, okay, now we're having a conversation and I am taking off the guru hat. I need you to give me feedback the way you would give anybody else, because we want this project to be the best it possibly can, and so this, falling at your feet, Guru Dave, whatever you want me to do, I'll do. That's not the mood I need right now, so that kind of thing has to happen for us to have fully healthy relationships and a healthy community.
Nice. Champak Lata Saki put an interesting point or question in the chat. And I think we're just about to hand it over to everyone, right? But Champak, let me just read this. Champak says, how to navigate just doing what we want to do and are inspired to do in Krishna consciousness, and taking guidance from seniors and those more experienced than us in Krishna consciousness, who might need to guide us in our Krishna consciousness in ways we can't see, and checking our own ideas with instructions of the Guru. So is that clear enough? Is that a clear enough question? What do you think of that question?
We all need somebody whose judgment we trust, who can give us feedback. For some people, that is indeed the guru, but many gurus have so many disciples that that's, not going to be possible for them to have that kind of relationship with everyone. So we need to have a what they call a shiksha guru, or an instructing teacher. Maybe not, there's no rule that says you can only have one guru. It's just you want all your gurus to be on the same page. So it is important to have somebody who knows our life, to whom we can express our challenges and concerns, and who can then, we can have that dialogue with. That is really important. And it's an ongoing process. Again, my own spiritual teacher, he has given instructions to me and other devotees. And then when we come back with the feedback, he'll modify it. So sometimes we think, oh, Guru Maharaj said I have to do this, so I'm just going to keep doing it. And that can backfire. I'll tell you, I remember when I joined in the 80s, there were a certain number of women whose husbands had left Krishna consciousness in our community, right? And the message was, if you've been married and you have a child, you should not remarry. You should accept Krishna as your husband. And and for some of those women that worked out beautifully, right? But there were other women who, it was obvious to the entire community, they just were not meant to live alone. Their need for shelter, they were not independent. They needed someone to, give them that kind of companionship and shelter. And they all ended up leaving Krishna consciousness. So, the instruction was the highest instruction. That is what Prabhupada said, but if somebody can't maintain their Krishna consciousness and follow that instruction, then, we have to make some adjustment. Prabhupada did that.
Prabhupada accommodated.
He would accommodate, if you can't meet the highest standard, then do this, or, then do this, but at least keep chanting, at least keep coming,
So now you're in a second marriage right now, a happy
I am.
marriage.
Yes.
And so your experience, you learned from the mistakes of the first marriage and your husband. I mean, you've had a little bit of a rocky road with him also, right? But things are going really well right now. Huh?
I mean, we had a rocky road at the beginning because we were both raised in dysfunctional households and didn't have the tools.
How did you work that out?
We went to couples counseling. That's what we did.
So you would highly recommend couples counseling.
I would, because we use the tools, communication, conflict resolution, all those. We use the tools that we absorbed unconsciously in our childhoods. Sometimes they work great, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're going to be compatible with a particular person, sometimes they're not. But to intentionally learn new tools, that is beneficial in all relationships, husband, wife, colleagues, work colleagues, whatever.
Great. That's good. Should we open up for questions from the group, Champaklata?
Yes, Leela Devi's going to field the questions. So if anyone has any questions, please send them into the, actually in a direct message to Leela DD. And then she will field the questions and ask Radha Dasi the questions.
Radha Dasi, this was great. Thank you for being so real and for sharing your precious time with us. And I hope we have some really authentic questions for your authentic answers. Thank you so much.
I'll share one other point on this last topic we were on. I had the opportunity once to ask Yamuna Devi, I was a single mother, right? And I asked her, how can I do this? And without a husband, how can I maintain my Krishna consciousness and not remarry? And she really discouraged me from even trying to do that. She said that everybody needs a partner in Krishna consciousness. She had Dina Tarne, that they were, bhakti buddies. They supported and sheltered each other. And she said, if you don't have that, whether through a husband or a really close committed friend, you're it's not a good environment for Krishna consciousness.
Wise, very wise. So everyone needs a dear and trusted friend, and not just, it's great if there could be two or three, right? Couldn't, maybe
Right.
Not necessarily husband, but a really dear. And I think also we fall into this kind of senior devotee thing. Oh, I have to listen to the senior devotees. Well, maybe there's someone who's not so senior, who's more wise than someone who is senior, who you trust very, very deeply and someone who understands you. So
Yeah.
okay. Let's open the floor to these wise women's voices.
Thank you so much. We're waiting for, there's a couple of questions here, but I'll ask one that's related to something you mentioned. This is such a great conversation. So you mentioned a little bit about self-worth with, you know, with women and trusting our own thoughts and feelings. But often the road from self-worth to knowing our true worth, even in the spiritual sense, there's a huge gap in between. And so do you have any advice on how to practically practice getting from that one place to the other without it being a false sense of pride?
I know for me, one of the keys in, you know, learning to trust myself and feeling okay with myself was giving myself permission to be a hot mess, right? You know, because a lot of times what holds us back is we don't want to appear like we're struggling or that we don't know everything or that, you know, we have, you know, attachments, material attachments. And I realized in my own life that, you know, really everybody already pretty much knew where I was at, you know, and this trying to maintain the facade wasn't really fooling anybody but me, you know. But it was a big step to tell myself, okay, it's okay if you say something and it comes out wrong. It's okay if you take on a project and you don't do it perfectly. You know, it's okay no matter what you do. And I guess this is the one realization I feel like I've gotten in this life is no matter what you do, Krishna will still love you, right? And that's how we grow. That's how children grow, is we try to do things and we don't do them perfectly. You know, a friend told me once that, you know, when a baby is trying to walk, they fall down so much, right? And everybody says, oh, yay, you tried, right? You know, so we should treat ourselves that way, that, you know, we tried. Yes, that's great. No one says, stupid baby, you know, quit trying to walk. You just fall down, right? You know, so we can give ourselves permission to try.
Thank you so much. It's so beautiful because often we don't accept ourselves, and you know, and God accepts us, you know, no matter what. But we hardly can accept ourselves sometimes. Thank you. So this question's along the lines of that. I feel. It has to do with expectations and acceptance. So it says, often women are expected to dress up very well and apply makeup, but I always like to be simple and it usually works. I feel as I am moving towards professional life, I'm expected to dress up well in a meeting for me to be taken seriously. How do we see this in Krishna consciousness?
This is something that I have struggled with. Clothes are a way that we signal our values and our identity to other people, right? So by conforming to an expectation of a particular arena, you know, we are sending the message that I belong here and I fit in. Right? When I go to court, one of my friends told me I look like a Jehovah's Witness, you know. It's like very conservative, you know, black clothing, you know, and it's not what I would choose to wear to express myself, but I am mostly expressing to my clients, you can trust me with your money. I'm not going to let you down. I'm reliable and a serious attorney. I keep my head covered. I was talking to a friend about this the other day. I have found that men in the Krishna consciousness movement, particularly the senior men who are the leaders, this is not so true of the younger men, but the senior men, they can hear what I have to say more easily if my head is covered, right? Because it's signaling to them that I'm not here to disrupt your society. I'm not, you know, I'm not trying to cause you trouble. I'm not judging you. You know, I'm one of you, right? So I personally, you know, hair covered or not, it's not a big deal to me. But, you know, this is how I signal to people that I'm here to be a unifier and not a divider. So I think you find something that you can accept, that you feel comfortable with, but that gives the right message for the arena you're in. So in the professional arena, that may involve some makeup. It doesn't mean you have to get on all the makeup tutorials on YouTube and learn how to do a cat eye or whatever it is they're doing these days.
Thank you so much. It's an interesting balance, right? Because when we are out there in the world, we do sometimes have to play the game, but how do we do that with keeping our values and not letting it define us, right? I think that's I'm not defined, but by what I wear or don't wear, and then from there we can make those decisions. Oh, I choose to wear this because it gives a certain message in whatever arena I'm stepping into. Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you. Someone asked, do you have any good recommendations for couples counseling?
No, I'm old, and the couples counselor we used is retired now.
Well, Partha and Uttama.
Yeah,
the Vision team.
The Grihastha Vision team website has some counselors listed also. But basically, if you can find a devotee, counselor, practitioner of bhakti yoga who also does couples counseling, that's wonderful. But if you can't, you just need somebody who, can hear what you're saying about your own unique culture and work with that.
Yes, so we put here, Champakalata put an email address for Uttama and Partha and the Grihastha Vision team. They're all amazing.
So can I ask a question? So Radha, you're saying that it doesn't have to be a devotee, but it should be. It really should be someone who's culturally sensitive to the culture that you adhere to, that you believe, you feel comfortable with, which may be anywhere along the spectrum of conservative, liberal, whatever you hold true and real in your life and your.
Yeah.
So there's a comment here. Thank you for sharing your heart, your pain, your truth, and your encouragement. Beautiful comment. How does one reconcile the notion that our struggles and challenges in life are because of your karma, and that you must have done something wrong in your past life, thus you are paying for it? So if you're abused, you must have been an abuser. If you have some other difficult challenge in life, that you must have done something before, versus standing up and not allowing yourself to be abused or allowing someone to try to exert control. So using karma as a way to spiritually bypass these things.
The fact that something is our karma doesn't require us to, lie down and be the doormat. It may be my karma that, it was my karma that I had, extremely dysfunctional parents. It was their karma to have extremely dysfunctional parents. It was my grandparents' karma, it goes back and back. But that doesn't mean I just say, oh, well, that's my karma, so I'm not going to do anything to change the situation, right? And when we begin to approach God, when we turn to the Lord and say, my goal is to reach you, He begins to arrange our karma in such a way that we're still getting, the reactions that we've earned, but we're getting it in such a way that it is going to help us in our goal of becoming closer to Him. So when we are faced with challenges, we can know that Krishna has personally arranged this situation to teach us something, right? The other thing to keep in mind is, I'm suffering this life in this way, but every one of us, unless you came directly from the spiritual world and you've been sent here to help the rest of us, every one of us has been an abuser, been a murderer, been a, whatever. We've all stolen, we've all cheated, if not in this life, in one of the millions of lifetimes that's come before, right? So it's not anything exceptional about me that I struggle with this, past and my past karma. We're all doing it. And if somebody has a completely materially blessed life, all that means is they've accumulated some good karma and now they're using it up. You know, the real realization is we want to get beyond karma altogether. We want to get to the transcendental platform.
Yeah, that's there's a difference, and one I often struggle with. There's a difference between accepting responsibility for our lives and blaming ourselves for our lives. One is empowering and the other is disempowering.
Yeah.
Radha Dasi, what's your advice on empowering ourselves? What's your advice to all of us? How can we go to the transcendental platform? How can we be an empowering voice to ourselves?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I can only speak from my own experience, but the thing that really kind of shifted my perspective on that is just this realization that Krishna does not care about anything I've done or I haven't done. All he wants is for me to come home, right? So what's happened in the past is in the past. If it, you know, becomes, you know, fuel I can use for moving closer to Krishna, great. If not, it's just a trivial irrelevancy that I should just not think about. And you know, it's like talking to the father who says, you need to do better in this area. And you say, yes, Dad. And then don't make any effort. I mean, I have that with Krishna a lot, where I'm perfectly cognizant of where he's telling me I need to improve. And I haven't done it yet. Krishna doesn't, there's no timeline. Krishna doesn't say, okay, well, unless you take care of this particular anartha by, next Wednesday, you're out of the car. That doesn't happen. So this understanding that Krishna is going to help me no matter how much I screw up. Krishna loves me and he's just going to keep helping me come back. And of course we all have our times where we do something and we fall into self-blame or judging ourselves or whatever. But we can also see that, okay, I am experiencing this emotion, this perspective right now, and it will pass. Right? I don't know if I answered the question.
Yes, thank you. So here's another interesting question. It says, thank you. This realness is good for the soul. Can you talk about your journey of expressing and defining authentic femininity for yourself?
Yeah, one thing that comes up for me when I hear this question, and I don't know if it's really an answer, but this is what comes up for me, is that my grandmothers were both very clearly feminine women, right? And they were very strong feminine women. But my grandmother, because she was Black in a community where, she was a second-class citizen, was the most she could aspire to. And my Chinese grandmother, because it was, so ingrained in the culture that the husband was the head of the household, both of them expressed their, themselves and their desires and everything in kind of what I would call an indirect way. They were not the kind of people who would challenge authority, but they would always find some way, of getting their point across or getting, what they needed. And for me, I have always seen that as being a feminine power. I know some people feel like, well, women shouldn't have to do that. And I agree, nobody should ever have to use those indirect methods. We should be able to express our natures. But for me, that has always been part of being a woman. And it may go back to the fact that as women, our brains are really wired for social connection, for building relationships, for building community, for building consensus, right? And that does require a different way of communicating. Men's brains lean much more into competition and control And so their communication style is different. Again, I'm not really sure that I'm answering the question, but what I don't want the idea of being a woman to mean you can do anything you want as long as you think and feel and behave like a man, right? We, as women, we are different from men. We bring something unique to the table. I don't want to lose that.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I saw another one here. Was this question about, thank you, Radha Devi Dasi, very wonderful sharing. How does a male devotee think they progress in Krishna consciousness when they cannot even see the soul in their partner? Is this not a big offense? And if so, then why cannot that be stated as a principle for all to reinforce and remind?
Yeah. You know, this thing about the hierarchy, right? You know, I'm superior to you. The actual understanding is not superior to you. It is, I am responsible for you, right? That's what it means to be higher up in the hierarchy. And the idea that if I'm married, my wife is supposed to serve me, that's material. You know, I'm supposed to serve her. My goal is to make her, you know, give her everything she needs to become Krishna conscious. And that means she needs to be emotionally peaceful. She needs to have, you know, material resources, so many things. And, you know, and the wife, it's not that I'm, you know, I will never express my opinion, you know, oh, Prabhu, whatever you say, you know, that can last for a few weeks, but nobody can maintain that in marriage, right? But again, it's like, how do I help my husband become Krishna conscious? How do we work together to help our children become Krishna conscious? One of the best examples I've seen of this is a couple I know. She is an initiated devotee and he is not, you know, it's just something that doesn't resonate with him. He's from India, she's from an Indian family born here, but they both grew up in this Indian culture. And she will not go to an evening program, right, until after he comes home and she has served him his dinner, right? But he will work all day, come home, drive her, you know, take his meal, drive her to the program. She's, you know, half an hour late or whatever. He doesn't want to go to the program. He has no interest in it. So he, you know, I don't know if he goes home or what he does, but 2 hours later, he comes back and picks her up and drives her back. So this idea of sacrificing ourselves to serve the other, it's so mutual in their relationship. And I felt like when I got to know them, I went, this is what Prabhupada was talking about. You know, that they may each have their defined role and they may, you know, each give up something in order to help the other. But, you know, the loving exchange is just so powerful.
That's the equality in sacrifice.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, and how
a lot of humility. And I also admire that self-sacrifice, because usually we want the other person to be just like me and think just like me. And I can't be in a relationship with you unless you get it the way I get it. But that example of humility and self-sacrifice, that I want to be responsible to make sure that your needs are met. And and that going both ways. It's a very beautiful example. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And we all have to realize too that we are unique individuals and our relationships should reflect that. You know, I have legal training. I'm licensed to practice law. I am capable of earning more money than my husband. It never made sense for me to stay at home, you know, and be a housewife while he would, you know, go out to work. I just didn't make any sense. And he's a much, much better cook. He's a fantastic, inventive, creative cook. If I made dinner, our children would say, "Oh, Mom cooked again." You know, so it makes sense for him to cook.
So I have one more question here, and then I'll check to see if I missed any. So you mentioned something about being biologically hardwired to make connections. What is the unique thing we bring I think that as women, you mentioned, we're
Mhm.
hardwired for this.
Yeah, I mean, there's actually research that shows that our brains, male brains and female brains, there are physical differences. So that the centers of the brain that go to communication and emotional connection are larger in women. The centers that, go to fight or flight, things like that, are bigger in men. So there biologically are differences that affect our behavior, right? Our innate behavior. When my son was little, I was really into this thing of gender equality. I have been my whole life, right? And I was convinced it was socialization. Okay. So one of the things I did was give him, quote unquote, girl toys. And I remember getting him a Cabbage Patch doll. And he unwrapped it, and I'm kind of thinking he may get upset, right? He says, "Oh, Mom, this is so cool," right? Picks up the doll, drop kicks it across the living room like a football. And he spent like half an hour kicking that doll all over the place. It became so obvious to me, like, yeah, there's just a difference, and to celebrate that difference. One of the biggest struggles I had practicing law was getting out of environments where the ethos was a woman can do anything a man can do, but don't try to do anything else, right? Practice law the way we've been practicing it. We men have been practicing it for 100 years. Don't try to change anything. Just fit in. And if that resonates with you, that's fine. There are women who fit into that environment. But the idea of collaboration, consensus, building unity, these are all things that women start with an advantage in doing, right? And so we can embrace that, whatever our strength is.
Yeah, there's a comment by Rukmini here. There's a book called The Female Brain, written by an MIT neurophysicist who's a woman. Fascinating read. Yeah, that's so interesting to practice really understanding our own strengths, like knowing ourselves deeply, and that it's not a cookie cutter thing, particularly, and none of it is. It's not a cookie cutter thing, and yeah, that's a challenge.
And Leela, I just wanted to say one other thing, that I think that's a type of wisdom and maturity in all of our relationships. In other words, I could have a mature, rewarding exchange of a relationship or dialogue with a woman friend who's very different from me in the way I think. In the same way, I can honor the the differences in a marital relationship, with understanding that what he brings to the table, what I bring to the table may be very different, but to be able to honor those differences, I think is really wise and mature. If there's time, I want to share this hilarious story from that female brain book that echoes the story you just told, Radha, about your son. So she tells an anecdote about a woman who was thinking that way, completely gender neutral toys for her little daughter. So her daughter she got her a red truck and all this kind of stuff. And one day she walked into her little daughter's bedroom, and her daughter had a blanket wrapped all around the red truck. And she's talking to the red truck like she's the mommy of the red truck. And she says, "That's all right, little truckie. Don't cry. It's going to be all right."
Yeah.
So there's a request here that we, oh no, okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so there's an announcement about a program that's happening with being given by His Holiness Radha Swami, and Janavi and Gauravani are offering a kirtan. So Brajarani has posted the link for this. And so we may be a little late, but it would be good to join. It will be a beautiful program. And Radha Dasi, thank you so much for this enlightening conversation. I had the feeling as you were speaking about domestic violence and those kinds of things, I was just thinking this is, it wasn't like we decided to talk about those things, but it's always like we don't know who's listening, who needs to hear this, and it's perfect. Just meant to be that we're having these conversations. We should have so many more of them on these platforms, so that we can support each other and be here for each other. So thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. Rukmini, is there anything else you'd like to add, or
Just
anyone?
Thank you so much, Radha Dasi, for your wisdom and your down to earth sharing of all these life experiences and out of the box thinking. And thank you for joining us. We're so grateful. And
Oh,
yeah,
thank you. Thank you. This has been very inspiring for me. Thank you.
thank you so much.
I hope you come back to talk to us some more. Next month, our Urban Day is January 24th. We'll announce it on our group. We'll be speaking with Guru Sharan Padma Devi Dasi. So hope to see all of you there. Thank you so much for being here. Have a beautiful, beautiful evening. Hare Krishna.
Happy
Krishna.
New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year.
All prayers for the coming year.
Yes. Goodbye to 2020. We can't wait, right?
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.